All of these things that, all these things that I could get my wife. me. At least though, although I am not a good shopper, I do realize that there are some things that are not really a good idea to get my wife for Mother's Day or for her birthday. And the first is this, and I think we don't have projection. Oh, we do have projection. All right. The first thing, you should never get your wife anything that plugs in. Anything that requires electricity can be seen as utilitarian. Another thing that it's not a good idea to get your wife for Mother's Day or for her birthday is you shouldn't get clothing that involves size, because there's a chance, the chances are 1 in 7,000 that you'll get her size right, and your wife will be offended the other 6,999 times. Do I look like a size 24? She'll tell you. And too small won't cut it either. Well, I haven't been a size 4 since I was 18. You just can't win in that area, men. You should also avoid anything that is useful or practical. That new silver polish that's advertised to save hundreds of hours of time is not worth you risking trying to get a few brownie points. Don't buy anything, here's a good one, that involves weight loss or self-improvement. She'll perceive that 6-month membership to a diet center is a suggestion that she is overweight. That's not a good idea, men. Also, you probably should not buy your wife jewelry. Let me tell you why. What your wife wants, you can't afford. And what you can afford, she probably doesn't want. Finally, you shouldn't spend too much money. Then you'll hear, how do you think we can afford all of that? She'll ask. But don't spend too little, or she'll say, is that all I'm worth? You see how stressful it is to shop? Well, Proverbs 31 tells us the worth of ladies of God, of women of God, of wives. They are far more precious than jewels, or your translation may say rubies. And let me just say that the goal is not to become a Proverbs 31 wife. What? That is not the goal. The goal is every day to be more like a Proverbs 31 wife, or a Proverbs 31 lady, I should say. Because this text just doesn't speak, I know that the text uses the word wives, but it just doesn't speak to married people. It's practical for any woman. Any woman who desires at some point in her life to get married, or if she just desires for singleness. It's still very practical because it speaks of the virtues of being a woman. And these virtues are things that women grow into over time, each day and each month and each year, as they are what Romans 8 says, they are conformed to the image of Christ each day. So as we look at Proverbs 31, we find that there are some high standards here. And men, when you find a woman who meets those standards, it's very important for us to bless them and to honor them and to praise them and to be thankful for them. And to remember that no woman perfectly in every way, in every time, in every moment will be a Proverbs 31 wife. And this passage reminds us that what Proverbs 18 or what Proverbs 18 verse 22 says, that he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Well, let's start looking at verse 10. It says, an excellent wife, or we could translate that, an excellent woman, or we could say a virtuous woman, or a virtuous wife. Who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. Or your translation may say rubies, or your translation may say fine jewels. The word there in Hebrew is a word for extravagant jewels. We don't know exactly what kind of jewel that is. A lot of translators suspect that it's a ruby, but we don't know for sure. But it really doesn't matter what kind of stone it is, other than to say it's fine, it's precious, and it's rare. And so the writer of this proverb says, to find a woman who is virtuous before God isn't easy. Walking and living that life isn't easy. It is tough. This wife of noble character, or this woman of noble character, is a tough walk before God. And that's why it is more precious. It is worth shooting for. It is valuable. It is honorable. It is a goal that we can, or women can, cherish. It tells us right off the bat that in a world where the physical, where there is so much emphasis in the physical, that God places beauty in the spiritual. That this is an issue of character. And this is where we need to place the emphasis, not in the physical, but in the spiritual. The real value of one's character is one's character before God. So a virtuous, noble, or excellent woman or wife, who can find? She's far more precious than jewels or rubies. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack in gain. A godly woman doesn't deplete. A godly woman doesn't deplete what is being earned. She won't deplete what her husband has earned faster than he can obtain it. She'll be a woman who her husband trusts, or whom her family trusts, and she'll be one who is self-controlled. She is trustworthy. And this takes a long time to earn, but it takes a very short time to lose. And some spouses have had their trust violated by another spouse who's taken them to the cleaners. They shop every weekend. They max out the credit cards. Max out, or they empty the checking account writing checks. And this passage says that it's nice to have a woman who can be trusted financially. It's nice to have a woman who you can trust with everything that you own. It's a good feeling to not lack for gain and know that your spouse is faithful in what you have worked so hard to obtain. So her heart trusts in her, and her husband, will have no lack in gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. A godly woman seeks to do good, doesn't seek to do harm to other people. And this is the ideal, because we know that in a marriage or in a relationship, there's good and there's evil. There are times when we just blow it and we do wrong before our spouse or our boyfriends, or in any kind of relationship with friends or parents or whatever the case may be. And there are times when we get it right. And the goal is that ultimately we do good. It's that if there were our deeds were to be put in the scales, that what we do right honors God and far outweighs what we do wrong. The goal isn't perfection. It's that we do good. And we do it all the days of our lives. Unfortunately, in the Christian walk, there are many people who are in it for a season. And they start out, man, they are on fire. And let me tell you, they are what I call high Pentecostal to begin with. Because they can rebuke demons, they can cast out demons, they can pray in tongues, they can do everything that shows how spiritual they are. And then 6 months later, They're no longer walking with the Lord. And the Proverbs 31 woman is someone who is faithful to God, and they are in it for the marathon, not the sprint. They are in it to walk with God every day in their walk, in their life. They are in it to be faithful to God day in and day out, and day in and day out. She does him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. What does this mean? Let's look at verse 14 also. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. The idea here is a woman who gathers raw materials and makes things on her own. In other words, this is a woman who is frugal, who is practical, who isn't going out and paying retail for everything, just wasting money. It's someone who is concerned with being conservative with finances and with resources. They're more concerned with making money or saving money than they are with spending money on unnecessary things. Her heart isn't geared toward earthly things, but toward the things of the Spirit. Well, look with me at verse 15. She rises while it is yet night, provides food for her household, and portions for her maidens. You've heard the expression that, that this person gets up at the crack of dawn. Well, this Proverbs 31 woman gets up before the crack of dawn. And whatever else may be her calling, she understands that her household is vitally important. And her household is her first calling. And she is determined to provide care for her household. And she provides food for her households. And she provides portions for her maidens. For those people who her employees, she takes care of them also. She's a servant. She's a servant to her servants. She's an others-centered person. It's not all about her. Verse 16, she considers a field and buys it. And with the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard. So this woman is practical. She cares for her family. And she's also, it seems to be, she's involved in real estate. So, she is an entrepreneur. She is looking for her own ways to support her family. Instead of saying, hey, I've got $5,000 here. I think I'll go shopping this weekend. This virtuous, noble, excellent woman is looking for ways to contribute to her household. She's a contributor, not a consumer. Terry, can I ask you to advance the slides? I'm having technical difficulties with my remote. Verse 17 says, she dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. Now, there are two ideas at play here. First is the idea of spirituality, that she is dressed with spiritual strength. She's a godly woman who is strong in the Spirit. But it also speaks of physical strength, that she takes care of herself physically, that she understands that, that her body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and she wants to make sure that she is adorned with both spiritual and physical strength. In verse 18, she perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. So she's working from morning till night, looking for ways, again, to be a contributor to her household instead of being just a consumer in her household. Verse 19. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. The distaff and the spindle, they were used to make thread before they had the spinning wheel. And so she's working physically. She's manufacturing things where she can. She's gathering the raw materials and manufacturing things that she can do to support her family, to take care of her children. And in verse 20, she opens her hands to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. You know, part of the joy of acquiring things is being able to give back, to being able to be a blessing to other people. And so this Proverbs woman is frugal, not so she can hoard everything up and amass these big bank accounts, but so she can be a blessing to other people. And she understands, hey, you know, all of this money isn't just for me to hoard in a bank account or in my 401k. It's so I can be a blessing to other people. And she also understands that I don't put myself in a position where I'm such a slave to debt that I can't be of benefit or be of resource or be of blessing to other people in their time of need. She opens her hands to those who have a need, to those people who are needy. She's content with the lifestyle that she has, an ordinary lifestyle. And she's generous while she's content. She's frugal, she's disciplined, she sets some aside for others. And she doesn't spend more than she makes, nor does she spend all that she makes. She understands how to handle her financial resources in a way that honors God. I wasn't going to say this because I don't know why I'm so reluctant to talk about giving in the church. I don't know why my entire pastoral career I've been reluctant to talk about giving. And you know, if you know me, that I rarely, if ever, talk about it. But the average giver in the church gives about 2.5%. 2.5%. Those who do give, a lot don't give, but those who do, it's about 2.5%, statistics tell us. 2.5%. And one of the reasons they cite for this is that they are so debt-loaded that they cannot give, or they think they cannot give, I should say. The truth is we can't afford not to give, to be a blessing to the Lord. But we place ourselves in situations where we can't either give to the Lord or give to other people when they have a need. And it's a blessing. It is a joy to be able to invest in somebody else's life or to be a blessing to them. And the Proverbs 31 woman knows and understands that she has to handle her finances and her household in a way that brings honor to God so that she can give back to the Lord, she can give back to her community, she can give back to her neighbors, she can give back to her family as need would have it. And verse 21 says, she's not afraid of snow for a household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. Now this really doesn't make a lot of sense. What it's really saying, it seems like, is it doesn't matter if it snowed because her family has red shirts to wear. Well, what in the world are they talking about? Well, really, what's being said has to do with the kind of material. You see, scarlet was made from a dye that was very valuable. And so in antiquity, we know that people would not dye something scarlet unless it was of very good quality and was going to last a long time. And so really what she's saying is she's not afraid. What they're saying is this woman is not afraid if, bad weather comes, because she's prepared by ensuring that they have good quality clothes. They have warm clothes to wear, thick clothes to wear. So she's making sure that the basic needs of her family are met. We live in a world where the political movement seeks to teach women that the first thing in importance is themselves. That nothing is more important than yourself. And the Proverbs 31 woman says that nothing is more important than my family. And looking out for those whom God has entrusted me to look after. She's not afraid of the snow because she's taken the necessary steps to provide for the needs of her family. In verse 22, she makes bed covering for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. You know, she pays attention to how she adorns herself, and she works hard to look well. She doesn't just let herself go. She invests the time in clothing herself and adorning herself in a way that honors God, that honors her family, honors perhaps her husband. But notice the order. She takes care of others first, and then she takes care of herself. We've had all of these verses about the things that she does for her family and her children especially, and then she takes care of herself by being resourceful and prudent and hardworking, and caring, honoring God with her money. And then she takes time to lavish herself with gifts. Lavish yourselves with things every now and then. She understands there's nothing wrong with lavishing herself and blessing herself because she's earned that right by taking care of those that God has entrusted her to take care of. Look at verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. You know, we learn from archaeological discoveries in the Holy Land that every town had walls and it had gates. And at the city gates, they had seats that were built into the sides of the walls next to the gates. And they call those seats bema seats. And that's where the elders would sit. And they would, they were like the town council. And they would make decisions and rulings. And they would be mediators of problems for people. And so the most respectable men in the community were part of these elders who sat at the gates. And so this woman's husband is a respectable member of the community. And she conducts her life in such a way that brings honor to her husband. Or maybe to her family if she's not married. In other words, she understands she doesn't live this selfish life. She lives a life that says, you know what? I need to be dignified. I need my life to be an honorable life because what I do doesn't just reflect me. It reflects my family. It reflects my parents, or it reflects my grandparents, or because I carry their name, or it reflects, my husband, or it reflects my children. You might say, my father has been a godly man in this community for 40 years or 50 years. I would never think of doing something that would tarnish his good name and his reputation. You see, the Proverbs 31 woman, church, knows that it's not just about her. That the decisions she makes has lasting implications, not just for her, but for her immediate context, those people around her. Again, this is counter to the movement of feminism today. It says, women, it's all about you. And the godly woman lives the life that Christ lived. In Scriptures, we see Christ putting others ahead of Himself. And the Proverbs 31 woman places others above self, whether it's their material needs or whether it's just in the area of reputation and honoring the family name, whatever the case may be. Verse 24 says, she makes linen garments and she sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchants. Well, these linen garments are different than the clothes we talked about earlier. The clothes earlier were their clothes for their household. These are clothes that she's selling. You see, the outer garments that they wore would have been made of wool, and they would have been coarse to the skin. And so they wore an undergarment or an undercoat that was made of linen that was soft, and it was cool, it was breathable, and it wasn't so hard on the skin. And so she's making these things, and she's making sashes or girdles, your translation may say, and they were worn either around the neck to hold their outfits together, or perhaps they were worn around the head as in some type of Middle Eastern do-rag. Whatever the case were, they were prominent so that people would know who they were. So she wasn't just in the real estate business. You know, she found out what was in great demand. She's practical. She's smart. She's an entrepreneur. She finds out what's in need, and she seeks to be resourceful, to be intuitive. It says in verse 25 that strength and dignity are her clothing. And I like this next part. And she laughs at times to come. All the clothing we've been talking about has been literal. Her family's clothing, her children's clothing, right? And then, the clothing that she sells. And now we're talking about figurative clothing. She's going to put on. If you remember in the book of Colossians and in the book of Ephesians, I think also we put on Christ, right? In here, we put on, or Proverbs 31 women, they put on strength and dignity. What kind of strength? Spiritual strength. That's godliness. That's a walk with God. They put on, right, the power of their walk with God. And that walk with God brings dignity to their life. Brings honor to their life. And so she's godly, she's honorable, and because of that, she can laugh at the times to come. I don't know about you, but I'm a worrier. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's confession time for me to come clean. I'm a worrier. And I have such a hard time giving things to the Lord. I just want to carry it all on my shoulders. Sometimes there's so much weight, I feel like I can't stand up straight. But I'm thankful I have a wife who has so much faith in the Lord that I won't say that I see her laughing at, things that are going on or what the future may hold. But she understands that God is sovereign, and that He's in control, and He's got this. He's got this. And so, it's such a blessing to me that my wife doesn't let things like this rob her of her joy. And the Proverbs 31 woman doesn't let the circumstances of life rob them of their joy. They know, hey, hard times are going to come, mountaintop experiences are going to come, hard times are going to come, the mountaintop's going to come, it's going to go back and forth. And they know, as the old Southern gospel song says, that the God on the mountain, and the God on the mountain is still God in the valley. Well, her strength and her honor or her dignity comes from being a person who believes the best and does the best. She knows that there is no better encouragement to a man, to a husband, than a woman who believes in him. And I'm just going to tell you, for you married folks, women, if you give up on your husband, he'll give up too. And if you encourage your husband and you believe in your husband, he'll believe in you. I tell you, there are many times where I didn't believe in myself, but because my wife believed in me, I began to believe in myself that I could do this or I could do that, or that I could carry on in ministry. And you just don't know. You can't place a value, a man can't place a value on what it means for his wife to believe in him. I tell you what, a man can feel like he can conquer the world when he has a woman who believes in him. Amen? And that's why it's so important, I think, for women to laugh at the times to come. What all does that involve? It involves being faithful to God and understanding that hard times may come, but I can trust in God. It also means being an encourager to those around you who may not be laughing at times to come. Be an encourager to your spouse and your children or your family instead of having a negative and critical attitude that might rub off on your children or might rub off on those around you. Be the one who says this. I know that we're in tough times, yet I notice that you're trying, and I notice that you love God, and I am noting that we have made it through previous tough times with God's faithfulness, and we can do this. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs or smiles with joy at the time to come. In verse 26, she opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teachings of kindness are on her tongue. You ever heard this before? If you ain't got nothing good to say, don't say nothing at all. The teaching of kindness are on her tongue. Women are naturally better communicators, I think, than men are. They know how to talk through things. They know how to talk through feelings. They know how to talk through emotions. They just know how to communicate. They're better communicators. But unfortunately, sometimes that winds up being, negative communication in the form of nagging or backbiting or critical and condescending attitudes. But the Proverbs 31 woman opens her mouth with wisdom. And the teaching of kindness comes out of her mouth when she does. She shares wisdom. She's learned about Christian maturity. She wants to share that with others and encourage and uplift people. Look at verse 27. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. She understands that idle hands are the devil's workshop. Right? She's not going to sit around watching Oprah and eating bonbons all day because she wants to keep herself busy being productive for her family and walking in Christ. She's no couch potato. Verse 28 says, her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her for it. Notice what it says, her children rise up. Now some people think that means they get up in the morning, they rise up out of the bed. But what I think this means is that they rise up, in other words, they grow up and they learn to appreciate their parents. As children, you parents, especially you mothers know, that as children, your children don't always, as mothers, appreciate you. But later in life, many times they'll come back and say, you know what? I really do appreciate you, Mom. Thank you for all that you've done for me. And so there's a time later, even if you don't feel appreciated now, that your children will come to you more than likely and say, you know what? Thank you, and I'm sorry for all the hard times I gave you, and thank you for all you do. Being kind and being faithful and being wise and being responsible and being hardworking, it pays off and will ultimately be appreciated. It doesn't mean that it's appreciated in the here and now. Unfortunately, it should be, but we live in a fallen world and it isn't. In retrospect, our legacies are what they should be. Verse 29. Many women have done excellently, but you surpassed them all. Look how this man praises his wife. Because the last verse that we read says her husband also, he praises her. How does he praise her? By saying, look, there's a lot of wonderful women in the world, but you are better than all of them. You surpass all of them. Sure, there are some good women out there, but they ain't got nothing on you, honey. Maybe it's your sister. And you want to say, you know what? There are a lot of sisters out there, but they don't have anything on you. Maybe it's your mother you want to say that to. Mom, there are a lot of good moms out there, but none of them compare to you. Maybe it's your wife or your girlfriend. And you want to say, there are some good women out there, but none of them compare to you. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. Verse 30, charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Now here's what you shouldn't say to your wife. Honey, you are swell, but you sure ain't charming or pretty any longer. That wouldn't be good to say. You know, there's a lot that can happen through the years. We age, we have accidents, we have illnesses. And what the world sees as physical beauty, it begins to fade. And the older you get, the more you realize that. And the more you begin to think, boy, how ignorant I was to place all of my value on how I looked, or my spouse's value on how she looked. It takes wisdom to understand this, that physical beauty begins to fade. And it's kind of unfair because men, you know, we live in this culture where when men age, we are what? Distinguished, right? How unfair is that? When women age, some people would say, well, they're getting older. And that's just unfair. We're all getting older. We're aging. And charm is deceitful, and beauty is vain. How many of you have known someone who just wasn't a beauty queen by the world standards, but there was something so attractive about them because of their personality, because of their charm, because of their charisma, because of their compassion? And then how many of us have known someone who on the outside looked so charming and looked so beautiful, but we spent about 5 minutes with them and we began to understand that there was something very repulsive about them. And that's because charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. But real beauty, godly beauty, is in a woman who fears, that means has reverential respect for God. Who, when she thinks about the Lord, she's reverent and respectful and desirous to be obedient to Him in her life. And that woman is the woman that we should praise and say, you know what? Boy, are you beautiful. Boy, are you noble. Boy, are you excellent. Boy, are you virtuous before God. That is where beauty and that is where wisdom begins. In fearing God, respecting His Word, adhering to His commandments. And our last verse, and we'll be done this morning. Verse 31. The woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit. How do we praise her? Give her the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. We're back to those gates where the elders, where the men sit, right, to make their decisions, right outside or right inside the city gates. And the writer of this proverb says, hey, give her credit. And when it talks about those city gates, that's really a figurative way of saying, give her praise publicly. Don't just praise her privately. Let others hear you praise her. Let others hear you speak positively of her. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to counsel a couple. And the only thing I ever saw them do was criticize each other in public, in front of other people. They always look for ways to condescend, especially, right, the wife would always condescend her husband, would always say negative things about him, would always downgrade him, or, just say really mean things about him in front of other people. And literally, this man walked like this because he was just so beat up by all of the negative things that have been said, right? Instead of praising him, and him instead of praising her. Imagine how it would have shifted the dynamics of their relationship if they went from criticizing each other to giving each other the fruit of their hand and letting their works be praised privately and in public. Honey, thank you for all you do. Oh, let me tell you about my wife. Let me tell you what all she's done. Let me tell you how great she is. Oh, let me tell you about my husband. Let me tell you how great he is. See, when our Proverbs 31 women work hard before God, they care for their family, they are diligent, they are prosperous, right? They are practical, they are entrepreneurs. When they're seeking to take care of their family and take care of what God has called them to do, or take care of their ministry, whatever their context is, we do well to thank them, to recognize that virtue. And God help us when we take that virtue for granted. Father, thank you for all you do for us. We thank you for this text